The emergency situation in New South Wales is continuing. The State Emergency Service is fielding hundreds of calls for help as a powerful weather system dumps huge amounts of rain on the mid-north coast. And as the system heads south along the coast, the Bureau of Meteorology says Warragamba Dam, Sydney's main water source, is expected to overflow this afternoon. Reporter Alison Zhao joins me now from Sydney. Alison, the dam, it's now at tipping point and expected to spill today. What's the situation there?
That's right. The Weather Bureau says that the Warragamba Dam is likely to spill this afternoon. It is nearing capacity, and that will have significant impacts downstream to other waterways in Sydney. The Weather Bureau was already worried about those swollen catchment areas, including the Hawkesbury and the Nepean rivers. And they've also said that they're concerned about those communities and suburbs that lie around those areas, including Penrith, Windsor and North Richmond. They've urged people in those communities to stay alert and to stay on top of any warnings from the SES about what happens if the Warragamba Dam does spill over. And this is what Justin Robinson from the Weather Bureau had to say a little earlier.
So we're expecting Warragamba Dam to spill this afternoon, and this will then combine with river flows from the Upper Nepean and also the Gross River and the other local tributaries, including South Creek. So based on our current modelling, we're thinking that we might see some minor flooding at Penrith and North Richmond during later today, and then depending how the rainfall events unfold, we might see moderate flooding develop later today and overnight, and those river levels may rise to the major flooding.
That was Justin Robinson there. Now, Alison, just take us through the current warnings in place for the Greater Sydney region.
The Bureau of Meteorology is warning people to stay home. It's urged people not to undertake any unnecessary travel and to avoid making any plans. They say of all days to stay home, this is the one. They've even likened the situation to COVID in a way, saying that taught us that sometimes the best thing we can do to keep ourselves and the community safe is to stay home. Now that's because there is a severe weather warning in place for most of the state, including the Upper Hunter, Illawarra, parts of Sydney, the mid-north coast, the southern tablelands and the ACT. And they say that intense rainfall is happening on the lower Blue Mountains and the Greater Sydney region in particular. And they also say that this intense rainfall can possibly create very dangerous and life-threatening conditions in this entire weather system. We're also seeing these localised storm cells happening, and that's where there's very intense bursts of rain in certain suburbs or areas. For instance, a storm ripped through Chester Hill this morning and damaged about 30 homes. And this has put a lot of pressure on the State Emergency Service as well, who've been fielding hundreds of calls. They've been undertaking hundreds of flood rescues around the state. And they've even done 2 flood rescues this morning in Sydney's west in Schofields, where 2 cars got stuck on a road that had filled up with water. So there's definitely a lot of pressure there for emergency authorities, who are urging people to stay home if they can.
And it is not over yet. Our reporter Alison Zhao there with all the latest in Sydney. And the New South Wales State Emergency Service has been getting hundreds of calls for help as that powerful weather system has been bringing rain and floods to the New South Wales mid-north coast. Reporter Jake Lapham has more from Raymond Terrace, north of Newcastle. But first, we're hearing from Claudie Jambo, who's outside Port Macquarie.
Well, we haven't actually been able to get into Port Macquarie, Miriam. As you can see behind me, Hastings River Drive is the main road into Port Macquarie. It is flooded well and truly. It is extraordinary scenes here. These rolling green pastures and have just turned into mass lakes. We were earlier speaking with one family whose house is just behind the trees there. It's a 2-storey house. Their whole first floor is underwater. We caught up earlier with Keely Toms and her family. Let's take a listen to what they've experienced in the past 12 hours.
Overwhelmed, very, very. It's a lot. It takes a lot to get through it, but we'll get there. We've got to stay positive. We were actually home and trying to get everything sorted. We've been watching the weather reports, and then, all of a sudden it just hit. It was too late. We got what we could out, and We ended up having to get the fireys out to rescue us at like 2 o'clock in the morning. So, yeah.
Claudia, it's not an isolated situation, is it? There have been more than 1,000 calls for help overnight, and many of those there on the mid-north coast.
There certainly has been, so a more than doubling of the statistics I gave earlier this morning. The SES have said that they've had about 1,100 or so requests for help, mainly in the mid-north coast, so that's Port Macquarie, Wingham, right through to Taree. There's also been about 277 flood rescues. Now, unfortunately, too many of those have been people driving through floodwaters. As the SES says, if it's flooded, forget it. And also to those that are doing the wrong thing and driving through those floodwaters, the SES is imploring people to think about their volunteers who need to go in and recover them and their vehicles. It's extremely dangerous conditions along the mid-north coast and down to the Hunter at the moment. So the SES and all authorities are urging people to stay at home and travel unless absolutely necessary and never drive through floodwaters.
And Claudia, before we let you go, what are we expecting there in that region for the next 24 hours or so?
More rain, simply, is the simple answer, Miriam. We're expecting more heavy rain from the lower Macleay, so up in the Kempsey area, right down and through to where I am here in Port Macquarie, right down south to Sydney and to the Illawarra. So a lot more rain to come, we've been warned, and already our waterways and riverine areas are very swollen and sodden. So SES and authorities are bracing for more assistance to those who are living in low-lying areas of the mid-north coast in particular.
All right, Claudia, we'll turn now to Jake Lapham, who's at Raymond Terrace, which is north of Newcastle. So, Jake, just tell us about what's the situation there where you are.
Yes, good afternoon, Miriam. I am in Raymond Terrace, and this is where two of the rivers of most concern for the SES meet each other, that being the Williams and the Patterson rivers. Now, I'm just going to get Binny to pan around to the river. It is extremely swollen, as you can see. We actually tried to drive up to Clarence Town and the Dungog and Patterson townships, which are about an hour or so from here, and we actually couldn't get any further, and that is because we were driving beside the Williams River and it was becoming increasingly swollen, and then we got to a roadblock. So similar problems to Claudia in actually being able to access these places to tell the story, because although the rain here isn't as heavy as it was this morning, the rivers, being those two, the Williams and the Patterson, are still rising. The SES say that they will peak sometime this afternoon, and there is a possibility of isolation in some communities in the Hunter. It's not unheard of for townships like Patterson to be cut off for days in major flood events. So no doubt those communities will be preparing for that eventuality and should be keeping a very close eye on the SES when it comes to evacuation warnings and orders.
So, Jake, with your travels this morning, when you have been able to get through and see what's happening, you talk there about people preparing. What sort of things are you seeing? What are you hearing from people who you're coming across as you make your way around the region?
Yeah, most of the main roads, like the Pacific Highway I've driven on a bit today, that's in fairly good condition. But when you get out to the smaller roads out in these sorts of townships like Raymond Terrace, for example, livestock is a major problem. There's a lot of low-lying paddocks with horses, cattle and the like. And I was just speaking to a lady earlier who was concerned she was going to her farm. Moving large amounts of livestock is no easy feat. And in a farming area like this, there's a lot of farmers having to do that. Also, elderly loved ones who may be in a position where they're going to be cut off for several days, getting things like food and supplies and sort of bunkering down and preparing for that are major concerns. The good news, I guess, is that we are at sort of the northern tip of this storm system. I can see on the radar now there's rain down to pretty much Nowra, but hopefully in the coming hours it will subside and these rivers they're going to continue to increase, but at least then it seems we're through the worst of the rain, hopefully.
Well, ABC viewers have also been sharing their footage of the deluge as well as the community response. Now, these pictures were sent in from Wingham by Peter Tate. Port Macquarie has also been brought to a halt, with some residents there ordered to evacuate. The heavy rain has made its way to Sydney. The Parramatta River is already overflowing. Challenging conditions have also made for spectacular viewing. This footage is of Ellenborough Falls, southwest of Port Macquarie. Further to the east, evacuees in Laurieton rallied together and spent the night at the local club despite flooding on the ground floor.